Hello, a secondary progressed chart can be Bija corrected. And over about the past year, I've gotten increasing evidence that the Bija corrected progressed chart is the correct one, that we need to apply this Bija correction to make the progressed chart calculation precisely correct. So I'm going to explain what the Bija corrected progressed chart is and the evidence that it may be the correct one. I'm not completely certain of this, but there's increasing evidence that it may be the correct progressed chart. So here is the progressed chart for Ben Affleck. Well, let me just first show you his natal chart. So there's Ben Affleck, the actor. He was born on August 15, 1972, 2:53 a.m. in Berkeley, California. And we progress his chart for March 16, 2021. Now, this is the normal progressed chart, and the progressed moon is at 19 Leo 27. Now, because Ben Affleck, let's go back to his natal chart, was born in 1972, he's about 49 years old, roughly. And again, his progressed moon position is 19 Leo 27. If we do the Bija correction, the progressed moon will be about 1 degree earlier for every 30 years of life. So since he's 49 years old, it's going to be about 1.5 degrees earlier. That would put it about late 17 Leo. So here is Ben Affleck's progressed chart with the Bija correction, and the moon is in fact 17 Leo 44. So there it is. The Bija corrected moon is about 1 degree earlier for every 30 years of life. For Ben Affleck, who's about 49 years old, it's a little over 1.5 degrees earlier. And up here in the description of the progressed chart, it says secondary progression, fractal house method. Well, that's a different issue. The fractal house method is the method for progressing houses. There are different methods for progressing houses, but I talk about that in other videos. And here in parentheses it says Bija correction. So it mentions the Bija correction has been applied, and consequently the moon is about 1.5 degrees earlier. The whole chart is a little bit earlier than the one that's done without the Bija correction. In fact, we can look at exactly what it is. With the Bija correction, the chart is the secondary progressed chart is calculated for October 2nd, 1972, we'll just round it off to 8:44 p.m. October 2nd, 1972, 8:44 p.m. And without the Bija correction, it's 11:55. So it's a little over 3 hours later. The moon moves about 1 degree every 2 hours. So there you see the moon moving a little more than 1.5 degrees. So the Bija corrected progressed chart is a little bit earlier in time, and the planet positions are a little bit earlier. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. Now, I've been watching my progressed moon for the past few years, the normal progressed moon and the Bija corrected. The Bija corrected moon is a little bit earlier. So according to the Bija correction, the aspects, like if progressed moon, for example, is going to be square my sun very soon, that's happening later by the normal method, the usual method for progressing charts, and happening earlier using the Bija correction. So you can just watch, the progressions and see which one makes more sense. So from my personal observations, it appears that the timing is a little bit better with the Bija correction. I'm not certain of this, so the evidence is not strong enough to be certain of it, but having to choose between Bija correction and no Bija correction, I prefer to use the Bija correction, even if my only reason was just based on observation. Okay, now I've already done this. I've shown you Ben Affleck's progressed chart with and without Bija correction. And where does the Bija correction idea come from? It comes from sidereal Western astrology. Sidereal Western astrology is a branch of astrology that builds upon the Western astrology tradition, that's why we call it Western astrology, and introduces many new calculations and interpretation techniques. It uses the sidereal zodiac, obviously, because it's called sidereal Western astrology. But sidereal Western astrology is not just Western astrology with a sidereal zodiac. It also has many new techniques and interpretive methods, and one of them is the Bija Corrected Progressed chart. And they have other kinds of progressed charts. If you wanted to read the original sources on them, one of them is a book called Primer of Sidereal Astrology by Cyril Fragan and Brigadier R.C. Firebrace. That's just to let you know where the idea comes from. Okay, so as I said, the Bija Corrected Moon in particular, because that's the one that has the biggest difference when we compare the usual progressed chart with the Bija Corrected, the Bija Corrected Moon seems to be timing better than the usual progressed moon. So my personal experience is that the progressed chart works. Secondary progressions work, solar arc directions work, but what I have noticed, even though I use secondary progressions and solar arc directions and I rely on them, I generally do not put much emphasis on progressed moon. I just don't. I see the information about what progressed moon aspects are happening, and I don't put a lot of emphasis on them because I haven't found them to work very well, and it's inconsistent. I mean, I'm using the progressed chart, but not so much the moon. So I'm just not able to see things work well with the moon, whereas progressed sun or Mercury or Venus, Mars seems to time very well with changes in a person's life. Okay, now that I'm looking at the Bija Corrected Moon, it looks like I might have found the reason why the progressed moon has not worked well for me for many decades, because the Bija Correction changes it enough that it's pulling it to line up with the dates correctly. The progressed moon makes an aspect, and according to Bija Correction, and things are happening that are related to the aspect around the time it's exact. I could not get that kind of result without the Bija Correction. So again, these are personal experiences, and in vibrational astrology, we are very data-driven, very evidence-based, and we do not have yet support for these ideas about Bija Correction from controlled research studies, where we would do a careful comparison between the usual progressed moon and the Bija Corrected progressed moon. That hasn't been done. These are personal experiences. So, we don't have as much confidence about this as we have in some other ideas. More research needs to be done. Now, let's look at an example of the difference between having Bija Correction and not Bija Correction in terms of the actual aspects occurring. So here is my birth chart, and here is a listing of progressed to natal for March and April 2021. Well, up at the top are slow-moving aspects and midpoint patterns. And as we scroll down, we start to see some things that don't last quite as long, that last a month or two, and these are typically progressed moon. Progressed moon with another planet midpoint lasting a few months. If I scroll down, I will see things like progressed moon square sun on April 2nd. So I'm making this video in mid-March. This means a little over 2 weeks from now, progressed moon will be square my sun according to Bija Correction. Now, without Bija Correction, it's going to happen later, probably in May or June. So with Bija Corrections happening on April 2nd, and notice that this aspect has not really started yet. I'm right here on March 16th today, just before it gets within the 1 degree orb. So I should start feeling it about a week from now, but especially within about a week of the exact date. So end of March through the end of the first week of April. According to the Bija Correction theory, I have a big Moon-Neptune thing going on. Not Moon-Neptune, Moon square Sun on April 2nd. Now if I scroll down, you'll see why I mentioned Moon-Neptune, because that is also going on. If I scroll, up, here it is up here, Moon opposition Neptune in the composite chart on April 3rd. So this is interesting. I have a Moon-Neptune opposition in the composite chart. This is the composite chart of the progressed and natal chart, and progressed Moon square natal Sun. So right within one day. So April 2nd, 3rd should have this strong emphasis. And I can show you a chart wheel. Here is, let's see, this is, yeah, this is what I want, but let me first show you this. This is my progressed chart for April 3rd, 2021. So there it is. And progressed Moon is 10 Aquarius 37. My natal Sun is 10 Taurus 37. So on April 3rd, progressed Moon is square my natal Sun. I can show you. If I just go back to my natal chart, there's my Sun at 10 Taurus, well, 10 Taurus 38. So going back to, back to this. Let's see. There it is. Going back to April 3rd, there's progressed Moon square natal Sun. Now, the Moon-Neptune in the progressed chart combines with Moon-Neptune in the natal chart to make a Moon conjunct Neptune in the composite chart. So here, let's see, on here I have, yeah, this is it. This is a composite chart of my progressed chart on on April 3rd with my natal chart. This is the Bija Corrected Progressed chart for April 3rd, combined with my birth chart to make a composite chart and look at the Moon opposition Neptune exact. Progressed Moon in this composite chart is 12 Aries 47. Neptune is 12 Libra 47. It's exact on this day. So I'm just confirming that what we see in this listing is in fact true. All I'm doing is showing you that what's shown here in this timeline, we can go in and look at those progressed charts and we can confirm that it is true. Moon opposition Neptune in the composite chart, and that composite chart is made between the progressed chart and the natal chart exact on April 3rd, and there's the progressed Moon square natal Sun on April 2nd. So this is how I look at these things. Every once in a while you see something kind of big with progressed Moon. This is one of them, and the way I interpret it is that around April 2nd, 3rd, give it 3 or 4 days before, so very end of March to about April 7, 8, so during about that week or so, maybe a little more than a week, there should be Moon-Neptune, an awakening of aspirations, of refined feelings, of inspirational feelings, and Moon square Sun meaning wanting to make a change. So some kind of inspiration. Often it's a movie, a music concert, a trip out in nature, or an experience of like a festival with certain cultural elements, and it just awakens the feeling, the mood, the atmosphere, that there's another kind of atmosphere, one that's sweeter, more inspiring, less disturbed, less fighting going on, less arguing, that wants to emerge. And Moon square Sun with the square aspect means wanting to make a change, that I want to change over to this more elevated way of feeling. That's what I suspect will happen. We will see if it does happen, and even if it does happen, it might be that I've mentally anticipate this so strongly that it's possible we can build realities just out of what we expect to happen. Okay, so this is to make it concrete to you what's going on. This is my secondary progressed Moon compared to the birth chart, and we've selected the Bija Correction, and we have these two aspects, Moon-Neptune opposition in the composite chart and Moon square Sun, all within one day. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I will post in the comments for this video what my observations are on what happened right within that time period. I'll wait till about mid-April after this time period is over, and then I'll post a reflection on what happened and does it suggest again that the Bija correction may actually work. Okay, now the Bija correction. Let me show you how we select it and let me tell you what it is. So in the Sirius software, if I'm looking at a birth chart, so here's a birth chart and I go to progress it. It's right here in this section, number of days in a year and month. So this is where you define how many days there are in a day and how many days there are in a month or a year. And that becomes the basis for how the progressions are calculated. So I click on this and it says, do I want to use the default value for the number of days in a year for secondary progression? Or do I want to use a customized value and I can check this Bija corrected? And then it does the Bija corrected calculation, which again, for somebody that's 30 years older, is going to be about 2 hours earlier and make the progressed moon about 1 degree earlier. Why? Because just to repeat this idea, it does it because if you define a day and a year in a different way than is usually done, you will get these values. And let me show you you might say the astronomy, the basic concepts behind Bija correction. Why I think it makes sense. I think the Bija correction makes a lot of sense because what it has to do with is what is a day and what is a year. The basic concept of a progressed chart is that 1 day after birth is lived out over a year of your actual life. Well, what is a day and what is a year? Let's take the question, what is a year first? Is a year from the beginning of spring this year to the beginning of spring next year, for example? That, if you define it that way, which is a reasonable thing to do, that's a tropical year. Tropical year means from the same point in the season 1 year to the same point in the season next year. So you can do it from the beginning of winter when the sun is at the equinox, not the equinox, the solstice. It's at the winter solstice, and then you can see when it's there 1 year later, and that becomes your year, a tropical year. Okay, or instead of a tropical year, when the sun returns to the same point in the seasons, like it's returned to the beginning of spring again, for example, or should we take when the sun returns to the same place relative to the fixed stars? And that's going to be different. And that's the sidereal year. So we can use a tropical year or a sidereal year. Okay. And another way to think of the difference between tropical year and sidereal year is precession of the equinoxes. That the tropical year and sidereal year are different, and that shows up when you look at the precession of the equinoxes. Now, next question, what do we consider a day to be? The most obvious sense for humans, for us living on planet Earth, is a day is from sunrise to sunrise. Or you could say from noon to noon, from the time the sun has reached its highest point in the sky to about 24 hours later when it reaches its highest point in the sky. And just like with the year, you're going to get two different lengths of time. If you consider a day to be from noon to noon, or from sunrise to sunrise, and you pick the average amount of time, that's 24 hours. You're saying its length of a day is 24 hours, and you're saying that a day is just the way we humans experience a day. A day is 24 hours. But there is an alternative, which is you look at when the midheaven, slightly less than 24 hours, comes back to the same exact point. Because that would be the Earth spinning around one time. So if you define a year as the Earth spins around once, that's a sidereal year. And the way you can think of it is, you can think of the sun at the midheaven, and or you can think of it as a star at the midheaven. So when Regulus or Sirius or any other star is conjunct the midheaven axis, the meridian plane, About 24 hours later, it'll reach it again, and that can be your length of a day. So is a day tropical or sidereal? These are big questions, and they affect the result. Now, we can answer this question. Is a year a tropical year or a sidereal year? And the other question is a day a tropical year or a sidereal year? By approaching it in terms of fractal sacred geometry. And this is what we do in vibrational astrology. We regard sacred geometry to be the matrix in which planetary positions and planetary effects occur. And the sacred geometry is developed from dimension reduction, where you have things like the celestial sphere in 3 dimensions collapses into great circles, which are 2 dimensions, intersections of great circles at points, reduces down to 1 dimension. I explain all this in other videos. So I'm just summarizing here, and this may sound abstract and strange, but this is fundamental physics. So I have here in bright blue the spin of the Earth on its axis resonates to the spin of the Earth revolving around the sun within the matrix and context of the great circles. That is how in VA we see the basis of secondary progressions and the basis of a lot of astrology. Secondary progressions is based on the idea that the spin of the Earth on its axis, what we would call a day, resonates to the spin of the Earth revolving around the sun, and that resonance creates this progress chart. The resonance between those 2 levels of spin, and that's why a day equals a year. Now, another thing about the sacred geometry that we use in vibrational astrology is we put a lot of emphasis on the spin, as I mentioned. We also put a lot of emphasis on the great circles, how the celestial sphere goes through a dimension reduction to great circles, and those great circles intersect to make powerful points. And so we look at all of this in the context of the great circles. So here's what we would conclude, just logically based on how we believe astrology works. We would conclude that the Earth spins on its axis to return to the same orientation to the midheaven, to the meridian plane each day, in other words, a sidereal day. From the point of view of vibrational astrology, we want to use the sidereal day, not the tropical day, because the tropical day is a hybrid of the Earth spinning on its axis and the Earth revolving around the sun. So a day when the sun rises 1 day later, that moment when the sun rises a day later is the interaction of the Earth spinning on its axis, but also of the relationship of the Earth to the sun. So it's in combining both levels of spin into one phenomenon. And that's not what we want to do with this simple sacred fractal geometry. We want the spin of the Earth by itself. What does it mean for the Earth to spin by itself? It more logically, intuitively, we would think that the Earth would return to the same point in the zodiac. So if let's say the MC is 10 degrees of Gemini, about 24 hours later, actually slightly less than 24 hours later, that same degree of Gemini will be at the midheaven. So the Earth has spun around in relationship to these great circles, to the same relationship to the great circle. From the point of view of vibrational astrology, we want to look at spin within the context of this matrix, of these coordinate systems, and how the Earth has spun in relationship to this, well, matrix is a good word for this environment in which everything is embedded. The bottom line is that the sidereal day is more purely a measurement of the Earth's spin without any relationship to anything else. A tropical day, you have to think about the Earth's spin, but you also have to think about the Earth in relationship to the sun and to determine it. more purely just as a function of spin without having anything to do with the Earth's relationship to the sun, that means the sidereal day. So, tropical year makes sense because, again, we're embedding everything within the context of the great circles. So, intuitively, just based on the idea of fractal geometry, it appears to be that what we want is we want a sidereal day and a tropical year. Because a sidereal day and a tropical year are both measured independently, without relationship to anything else, and within the context of the great circles and how to measure within the context of these great circles. So, that is Bija correction. Bija correction means use the ratio of sidereal day to tropical year. The normal progression is tropical day to tropical year. Let me say that again. Your usual way to calculate progressions is you define a day as a tropical day, like from sunrise to sunrise, and you define a year as a tropical year. But it makes more sense that we want to use a sidereal day to tropical year. And don't let the word scare you. You might say, well, that's inconsistent, using sidereal for one, but tropical for another. But remember, these words sidereal and tropical are just words to describe certain situations. They're not necessarily perfect words or the greatest descriptions of actually what's happening. They are good terminology. But what you might be missing when you think, one sidereal day, the other is tropical year, is that both of those things, the sidereal day and the tropical year, are looking at the placement of the Earth and how it is spinning in relationship to the matrix, the measurement system created by the fractal sacred geometry. Another nice thing, by the way, it's not our goal, but it's kind of like a side benefit to doing this, is that this ratio of sidereal day to tropical year is very constant. It does not change very much because the time it takes for the sun to go around, to spin on its axis, and the time it takes the Earth to revolve around the sun to come to the same position relative to the seasons is easy. It does not jump around a lot. So that's kind of nice. We have a very clearly defined relationship. Okay, so the next thing I want to cover is just to go over some of the details. That the Bija Corrected Progressed chart is based on the idea of a ratio between the sidereal day and the tropical year. Well, a tropical year is 365.242199 mean tropical days. A tropical day is 24 hours. A sidereal day is 23 hours, 56 minutes, 4.091 seconds. And I've got that in decimal point. That's 23.93446972 hours. So the ratio of a tropical day to a sidereal day is 24 divided by 23.93, and you get 1.002737779. That is the ratio of tropical year to sidereal day. Did I say that right? The ratio of tropical day to sidereal day. And then here we have 365.242199 times 1.0027379. This is the number of sidereal days in a tropical year, 364.242197. This is according to my calculations that I'm doing in the past few days. When I programmed the Sirius software for this ratio, I had come up with 366.2422. Both of these agree up to the fourth decimal point, and then there's some slight differences. And those differences amount to 1/3 of 1 second, so they're negligible. Bottom line is I've replicated this table by going back over it and incorporating in the information from students. Conclusion. Therefore, there are 366.2422 sidereal days in a tropical year. This is the Bija corrected ratio. The usual tropical progressed chart is based on 365.242199 each year, and that's nearly exactly 1 day less. Okay, so that's it, my friends. Increasing evidence that we want to use the Bija Corrected Progressed chart, not just any old progressed chart. I hope that makes sense. Thank you for watching this. God bless. Namaste.